Each morning at Evelyn's diner began the same way for Rachel Moore. She'd arrive before dawn, tie on her faded apron, and greet the regulars who filtered in like clockwork. The small diner nestled between a shuttered bookstore and a feed supply shop in rural Nebraska didn't see much excitement, but Rachel had long since accepted the rhythm of her days, pouring coffee plating, hash browns, smiling through loneliness that sat heavier than the trays she carried. She lived alone in a modest apartment above the hardware store. Family had become a concept more than a presence, with only worn-out photographs and half-hearted holiday calls to remind her of what once was. One chilly Tuesday in early fall, as steam from the kitchen mingled with the sunrise, Rachel noticed a boy sitting in the corner booth, alone, small for his age, with wary eyes and a backpack nearly as big as him. He couldn't have been more than 10. He didn't speak. He just slid into the same seat. Each morning opened a book and ordered a glass of water. That first day, Rachel brought it with a smile and a paper straw. He nodded so slightly she almost missed it. The next day, the same, and the next. By the second week, Rachel had memorized his schedule, 7:15 a.m., sharp every school day, always leaving by 7:55 to make it to the elementary school 3 blocks down. On the 15th morning, Rachel found herself holding a plate of pancakes she hadn't meant to order. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something deeper. Either way, she walked over and set it gently on the boy's table. "Kitchen made an extra," she said lightly. "I'll just leave it here instead of tossing it." The boy looked up, suspicion and hunger flickering behind his eyes. She offered a soft smile and walked away, not waiting for a thank you. From behind the counter, she watched him stare at the plate, then pick up his fork and eat as though afraid the food might vanish. When she returned, the plate was clean and the boy's eyes were glued to his book, avoiding hers. But as she reached for the dish, he whispered, "Thank you." That became their silent understanding. Each morning after that, Rachel brought him breakfast. Sometimes pancakes, sometimes scrambled eggs or oatmeal on colder days, always pretending it was a mistake or something left over. The boy never asked for anything, never initiated conversation, but he ate every bite. He sat in that booth like it was the only safe place he knew. She didn't know where he came from or why no one ever accompanied him, but Rachel never pressed. She'd learned long ago that questions could do more harm than good. Instead, she offered food and space, her only request a quiet thank you whispered like a prayer. Her co-workers began to notice. "Feeding a stray Kathy?" the line cook asked one morning. Not with cruelty, but with the wary tone of someone who'd seen kindness misused. "They never stay. You'll be out the cost, and the kid won't even say goodbye." Rachel only shrugged. "I used to be that hungry," she said. It was the first personal thing she'd told anyone in years. She kept her focus on the boy, making sure his water was topped off. His seat was warm and his food never late. Slowly, ever so slowly, she noticed a change. His shoulders relaxed just a little. His eyes sometimes met hers for a second longer, like maybe he was starting to believe this tiny corner of the world was safe. Rachel heard the muttered comments too. Charity case, some customers whispered, "Kids today expect handouts." Others sneered, but she let their words fall away like ash from an old stove. What mattered was not what they saw. It was what she saw. A hungry child who never asked for anything but needed everything. Rachel remembered that feeling, and she knew some kinds of hunger were invisible and some meals weren't about food at all. The small kindness Rachel offered each morning, once unnoticed and quiet, slowly began to draw attention, first with sideways glances, then whispers, and eventually open judgment. It started when a regular named Cheryl, who always asked for extra lemon in her tea but never tipped, snapped a photo of the empty booth where the boy usually sat. That morning he hadn't shown up, but Rachel, out of habit, had still placed a warm plate of scrambled eggs and toast there just in case. The photo, along with a sarcastic caption, made its way onto a local Facebook group that served as the town's unofficial gossip hub. "Feeding ghosts now," it read, with dozens of comments piling on beneath it. "Bet she throws it all away and cries into her apron." "Playing saint won't pay your rent," another wrote. Next time a stray kid shows up, remember this, it's all a setup. Rachel had never considered herself sensitive to the opinions of strangers, but the cruelty of the comments hit harder than she expected. It wasn't just the mockery. It was the insinuation that her compassion was performative, that it had no value because it didn't come with a spreadsheet or a headline. She kept showing up each morning hoping for the boy and kept setting down a plate, even as Kathy from the grill muttered under her breath, "Waste of food," and even as customers stared longer than they used to. The once quiet act had become something scrutinized, and Rachel began to feel the weight of it settling into her bones. Things escalated when Don Baker, the manager, pulled her aside after the lunch rush one Thursday. The office was barely big enough for two people and smelled of old receipts and cheap air freshener. Don, sweating through his button-down, leaned against his desk, his arms crossed. "We can't keep doing this," he said. "People are talking. It looks bad. You're giving away food, and it's starting to affect the bottom line." Rachel stood still, her apron twisted in her fingers. "I'll pay for it," she said softly. "Out of my tips?" Don raised an eyebrow. "Your tips barely cover groceries, let alone rent." She nodded. "Then I'll skip groceries. 1 meal a day. I can manage that." Don studied her, the weight of 100 small decisions written in the lines around his eyes. After a long pause, he sighed. "Fine. But if it interferes with your work or that kid causes trouble, it stops." Immediately, Rachel agreed, relief washing over her like warm water. She hadn't expected approval, but permission, even reluctant, was enough. From that day on, she took a few dollars from her tip jar before clocking out and placed them in a jar labeled Breakfast Fund, hidden behind the salt and sugar canisters. Then one morning the boy didn't come. Rachel checked the clock more often than usual, trying not to look like she was waiting. She plated his pancakes anyway and set them on the corner booth. But the seat stayed empty. She left the plate there until closing, then wrapped the now cold food in foil and took it home, unwilling to throw it away. The next day he didn't come either, nor the next. A week passed, then 10 days, and with each morning that passed without seeing his small frame and oversized backpack, Rachel's hope dimmed a little more. The ache was slow but steady. She hadn't known his name, hadn't asked. She didn't know where he lived, who his parents were, or even if he had any. But the space he left behind felt loud in its silence. She began to wonder, had Kathy been right all along? Had it just been a free ride he'd moved on from? Was she foolish to believe that quiet kindness given without condition could make any real difference? Doubt, once just a shadow, now took up residence in her chest. Her act of care had never been about reward, but the emptiness it left behind made her question if it had mattered at all. Still, each morning she brought in food. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't explain. She just left it there. Not because she expected him to return, but because some rituals become habits, not of hope, but of healing. And though the town seemed to forget the boy as quickly as he had come, Rachel remembered. She remembered how he had once looked at her for just a second longer each morning, and she held on to that like a flicker of light in a growing storm of doubt. 23 days after the boy's last visit, the routine at Evelyn's diner continued as usual. Rachel Moore had long stopped expecting to see his small frame pass through the door, though she still glanced at the clock every morning at exactly 7:15. The plate of pancakes she placed at the corner booth had become more symbolic than hopeful. A quiet ritual meant more for herself than anyone else. That morning began like the others. Coffee brewing eggs, sizzling the bell above the door, chiming in short, predictable bursts. Then everything changed. At precisely 9:17 a.m., the low hum of conversation inside the diner abruptly fell silent. Through the large front window, Rachel saw them, 4 black SUVs, pulling into the gravel parking lot. Their movements synchronized and deliberate, government plates, tinted windows, uniformed men emerging with purpose. The vehicles formed a semicircle in front of the entrance, and from the lead SUV stepped a tall man in a sharply pressed military dress uniform. His medals glinted in the morning sun. His expression was serious, and his steps were confident but heavy, like a man used to delivering difficult news. The bell above the door chimed once more as he entered, flanked by two younger officers. The room froze. Mark, the assistant manager, quickly emerged from the back, his tie slightly askew. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice faltering under the sudden weight of attention. The officer stepped forward and removed his cap. "I'm looking for someone who works here," he said clearly. "A woman named Rachel Moore." Every eye in the diner turned toward her. Rachel, still holding a coffee pot, mid-pour, set it down slowly and stepped forward. "That's me," she said, trying to steady her voice. The officer gave a small nod. "I'm Colonel James Whitaker, United States Army Special Forces Command." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope bearing an official seal. "I'm here because of a promise made to one of my men, Master Sergeant Thomas Carter." Rachel furrowed her brow at the unfamiliar name, but something about all of this made her pulse quicken. He was recently killed in action during an operation overseas. Before he deployed, he made arrangements in case he didn't return. In his final letter, he left a request. The colonel paused for just a moment, his voice steady but not unfeeling. "If anything happened to him, we were to find the woman who had been feeding his son Eli at this diner." The name hit Rachel like a sudden gust of wind. Eli. The boy, her throat tightened. Colonel Whitaker unfolded the letter and held it gently in his hands. Sergeant Carter wrote that his wife left shortly after his deployment and that Eli, his only son, had been managing alone with the small emergency fund he'd left behind. No one knew. He never told anyone he didn't want to be taken away from his home. The colonel glanced around the room, then back at Rachel. "Eli came here every morning and you fed him. Without asking his name, without questions. You never made him feel like a burden." Rachel's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope, unable to stop the tears gathering in her eyes. It was all coming together now, his silence, his guarded presence, the hunger he never voiced but always carried. She had seen it every morning, and she had answered it the only way she knew how. The room remained silent, reverent, as Colonel Whitaker continued. Sergeant Carter's letter was read aloud at his memorial service. In it, he said, "Tell the woman at the diner that she didn't just feed a hungry child, she protected a soldier's son. She preserved his dignity when everything else in his world had fallen apart." The weight of the words was almost too much for Rachel to bear. She pressed the envelope to her chest, unable to speak. The kindness she had offered without expectation, without knowing, had echoed across continents and come back to her in this profound, unimaginable way. "When Adam Sergeant Carter's brother found out about you, he and I made it our mission to find you. To thank you in person," the colonel added, then in a gesture rarely offered outside military protocol. Colonel Whitaker stood at full attention and saluted her. Behind him, every other officer followed suit. The gesture stunned the diner into even deeper silence. Rachel, a waitress who had once been invisible, stood at the center of it all, clutching a fallen father's gratitude, absorbing the collective respect of men who understood the true cost of war. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't needed recognition. But in that moment, surrounded by solemn faces and unspoken reverence, she realized something important. Sometimes it isn't the grand gestures or the loud declarations that change lives. Sometimes it's a plate of pancakes and a quiet place to sit, and sometimes that's more than enough. The moment felt suspended in time as Colonel Whitaker unfolded the handwritten letter, its paper worn and creased from travel, yet reverently preserved. The diner, once a background hum of clinking plates and casual chatter, had fallen into a profound stillness. Rachel stood rooted in place, hands trembling slightly, as the colonel began to read aloud Sergeant Thomas Carter's final message. His voice carried both strength and sorrow, weaving through the words with precision and care. To the woman at the diner, he read, "Thank you. You didn't just give my son food, you gave him a place to belong, a reason to believe someone still cared. He wrote about you often, not by name, because he said you never asked for his, but he said you smiled every morning, like it mattered. And it did. As the colonel continued, the letter painted a picture of Eli's resilience, his quiet suffering, and the profound impact of Rachel's unnoticed compassion. Sergeant Carter had written about how deeply it comforted him to know that while he was far away facing danger, someone back home had looked out for his boy, not with pity, not out of duty, but with simple, unwavering kindness. You never asked who he was. Whitaker read, never questioned why he came alone. That, to me, is the highest form of humanity. By the end of the letter, Rachel's eyes were full of tears, her throat tight with emotion. The letter was more than a thank you. It was a legacy. It was proof that what she had done in silence had echoed far beyond the booth in the corner of Evelyn's diner. Then, as if on cue, Colonel Whitaker took a deliberate step back, placed his cap under one arm, and snapped to attention. On behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, he said firmly, and in honor of Master Sergeant Thomas Carter, we offer our respect. With that he rendered a formal salute, a gesture of such rare honor that it sent a ripple of astonishment through the room. Every uniformed officer in the diner followed suit, standing tall, their hands raised in crisp practice synchronization. The civilian patrons, moved by the solemn beauty of the moment, stood as well, some placing hands over hearts, others lowering their heads in quiet reverence. Rachel could barely breathe. Never in her life had she felt so seen, so validated, not for grand gestures or accolades, but for the quiet decision she made every morning to simply care. Word of the encounter spread faster than gossip ever could. That same afternoon, the town's local newspaper ran a headline that read, "A Waitress's Quiet Heroism, Honored by Special Forces." The article included a quote from Colonel Whitaker's speech and a photo of Rachel, tearful and smiling, clutching the letter against her chest. The Facebook group that had once ridiculed her now reposted the story with apologies and tributes. Dozens of comments poured in. "Thank you for reminding us that kindness still exists. My son is in the Navy, and your story brought me to tears." The community, once skeptical and snide, now stood united in admiration. Regulars requested to sit in Rachel's section. Strangers left generous tips and heartfelt notes tucked under coffee mugs. Don Baker, the very manager who had once warned her not to give away free meals, quietly approached Rachel a few days later with something in his hands. "Thought this might be appropriate," he muttered, scratching the back of his neck. It was a small brass plaque, no bigger than a dessert plate, engraved with the words "reserved for those who serve without fanfare." He installed it at the booth where Eli had once sat every morning. Above it, he hung a neatly folded American flag, flanked by two photographs, one of Master Sergeant Carter in uniform and one of the empty booth with a plate of pancakes. The gesture was quiet, dignified, just like the act it honored. The plaque soon became a quiet symbol within the diner. Veterans passing through town asked to sit there. Active duty soldiers traveling home on leave left behind their unit patches or challenge coins, tokens of silent brotherhood. Rachel began pinning them to a small bulletin board behind the counter, a growing tribute to sacrifice, service, and the ripple effect of a single kind gesture. She never boasted about the recognition. When asked, she would smile gently and say, "It was just breakfast," but everyone who entered the diner knew better. They saw the booth, they read the plaque, they felt the weight of what it meant, and many walked away, changed more, aware, more grateful, more open to the power of small, consistent acts of goodness. For Rachel, the recognition didn't change her, but it did lift something that had weighed on her heart for years, the feeling that her life, quiet and solitary, didn't matter much in the larger scheme of things. Now she knew the truth. That a plate of food given without expectation, a smile offered without judgment, could be more powerful than she ever imagined. The honor bestowed on her wasn't just a salute or a plaque, it was something deeper, a confirmation that kindness matters, even when no one is watching, especially then. A week after the salute, after the news stories had quieted and the steady rhythm of Evelyn's diner returned, Rachel arrived for her shift to find a small manila envelope resting on the counter where she kept her order pad. There was no name on the front, just her first name, written in careful block letters, unmistakably the handwriting of a child. Her fingers hesitated as she opened it, already knowing who it was from. Inside, on lined notebook paper, was a handwritten letter from Eli Carter, the boy whose silence had once filled the booth in the corner. Now living with his grandparents in Colorado, he wrote in simple, honest language that struck her harder than the colonel's speech had. "Dear Miss Rachel," it began, "I didn't know your name until the day the soldiers came, but every morning you were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't invisible or broken. My dad always said heroes wear uniforms, but I think sometimes they wear aprons too." As Rachel read, tears welled in her eyes. Eli wrote about how he had missed his father every single day, but somehow found comfort in the diner, in the routine, in her quiet kindness. He told her that his grandmother baked cookies now, and that he was learning how to fish with his grandfather, but he still missed the pancakes she made because they tasted safe. He ended the letter with, "Thank you for not asking me why I was alone. I couldn't have told you even if I tried. But you didn't make me feel like I had to. That made all the difference." It was signed, simply. Your friend, Eli. Rachel folded the letter gently and placed it in her apron pocket near her heart. She would frame it later, not for display, but as a reminder for herself of what it meant to see someone without needing answers. Not long after that, another gift appeared, this one even quieter. One morning, before the diner opened, Rachel found a small metallic coin on the edge of the prep counter. It shimmered slightly in the early light. On one side was the insignia of the U.S. Army Special Forces. On the other, engraved in crisp Latin lettering, were the words, "Semper Mema, always remembering." There was no note, no signature, no indication of who had left it, but she didn't need one. She understood. It was a soldier's challenge, coin, something rarely given to civilians. A silent gesture of gratitude from a brotherhood that valued loyalty, courage, and the kind of invisible strength Rachel had shown every morning in that booth. She closed her hand around it and slipped it into her apron pocket next to Eli's letter. The coin became a permanent fixture on the diner's back shelf, nestled among salt shakers and spare menus. Not for show, but for remembrance. That quiet token, along with Eli's letter, sparked something in Don Baker, the manager who had once doubted the wisdom of giving away food. One afternoon, Rachel walked in and found him taping up a new sign in the front window. It read in simple block print, "Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry." He caught her eye and gave a small shrug, figured it was time. Rachel said nothing, just nodded, her heart swelling with a complex mix of pride, gratitude, and something she couldn't quite name. The new policy didn't bankrupt the diner, as some might have feared. In fact, business picked up. Word spread that Evelyn's wasn't just a place to eat, but a place to be cared for. People came from nearby towns, not just for the food, but for the feeling veterans dropped by, to leave patches or share quiet stories. Families struggling with bills came in with hesitation, but left with full bellies and tearful smiles, and tucked under salt shakers and behind syrup bottles, customers began leaving notes of their own. "You helped my brother after deployment. You reminded me what real kindness looks like. Thank you for not making us feel ashamed." For Rachel, it was never about recognition. She still wore the same faded apron, still served coffee with the same soft smile. But something inside her had shifted. She moved with a deeper sense of purpose, no longer questioning whether small kindnesses mattered. She knew now that they did sometimes more than words, more than policies, more than money. They could ripple across states, across families, across generations. And though most of the world would never know her name, a small boy in Colorado did, a fallen soldier did, and a wall of challenge coins and handwritten notes stood as silent proof that one person's kindness, given without condition, could become a legacy no plaque could ever fully capture. As summer approached, Rachel often thought of Eli, wondering if he still read his book at breakfast, if he still remembered the booth in the corner. She imagined him growing stronger, feeling safer, no longer bracing for the world to disappear on him, and that was enough. The boy who had once come in for water had left behind something far more powerful, a reminder that to truly serve, you don't need to wear a uniform. You just need to notice who's hungry and feed them. No questions asked. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of quiet kindness, then join us at Deep Inside HQ, where we uncover the untold moments that reveal the very best of humanity. Subscribe to our channel, share this video with someone who still believes in doing good without applause, and let's keep these powerful stories alive. Your support helps us continue shining a light on ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because sometimes it only takes one story to change someone's day and maybe even their life.